Hello, hello. It's David here once again with another recap from the Charlotte Open. This one is round 6. And coming into this round, if you've been watching the other videos or if you haven't, we've got 4 wins and a half point bye. So a total of 4.5 out of 5. And currently at this point in the tournament, I'm tied with one other player for first place. And in a Swiss system, you play players with the same points. So at this point, coming into this round, I already knew that I would be playing the other person with 4.5 points. And this game would decide whether there was going to be a multi-way tie for first, or if one person was going to be in clear first if one of us won. And so this game, there was a lot at stake for the tournament results. And to be honest, I was quite nervous. Typically, I haven't played chess very well under pressure. And so I was, I was nervous coming into this game, but I had the white pieces, so I was happy with that. I had researched some of the games of my opponent online, so I knew what they played against the Smith Mora. It looked like they played the Sicilian, and the line that they played online with their games, I had prepared lots of things, so I was ready for it, but I wasn't sure if that was the line that they were going to play, um, just because there weren't that many games with them playing that, and some of the games were from multiple years ago, so I wasn't sure if this was what they were going to play. And this opponent I had played one other time at the Charlotte Chess Center, but I was black, they were white, so I couldn't even really use that game as an example of something that they would play. So really, I didn't know what they would play, but if they played what they played online, then I was ready for that. And so let's just go ahead and get into this game, this round 6 game. There's a piece sacrifice. There's lots of complicated tactics in this game, and for the most part, I navigated the positions fairly well. And so let's get into it. This is probably the second game that, like, this is the top 2 game for me that I've ever played. So let's get into it. So I start off with 1e4. My opponent does play the Sicilian, so I know that they take on c3, so I knew that they would get into this position. And here, I thought I knew, based on my prep, what my opponent would play, but instead they played e6 instead. And so this is completely different than anything that they have played that I looked at online. So at this point, they are not playing what I prepared. Luckily, I do know what to do against this move, but at the same time, I'm not entirely sure what we're going to get. And here my opponent played this bishop c5 move, and now this was a pretty new move. I don't think I've ever actually faced this move before. Usually the bishop comes out to b4, as we saw in round 2, and that I had already knew what to do against that. I wasn't going to go for the queen b3. I was going to castle. And so I knew what to play against that. But when my opponent played bishop c5, I took a few minutes here because I wasn't sure if I was missing something, if there was something I could take advantage of. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's really nothing here. So just castled. My opponent played knight g to e7. All standard stuff here. And here, I thought for a little bit longer here, because I thought about going bishop g5. But after castles, I just wasn't sure what we were gonna, that would do anything. So I just played bishop f4. Just really keeping an eye on this diagonal. Mainly these 2 squares here, c7 and d6, maybe knight b5. And if my opponent plays d6, well, then I go knight b5. And if e5, I want to go knight g5. My bishop has been opened up. My knight's attacking this. Queen h5 or queen b3 is coming. And I already knew that this had to be fine if my opponent tried to close off this diagonal. Instead, they should castle here, but instead my opponent does go for d6. And at this point in the game, I knew that I probably had this game. Obviously, it's not winning here. I mean, if you look at you put this position in the engine, it's going to tell you it's fine. Maybe white slightly better, and I mean slightly better, but from a psychological mindset, I knew I had this game. So I do go for this knight b5. I'm attacking this d6 pawn 3 times. The only way for my opponent to defend it is to try and play e5, which they should not do. They should just give up this pawn. But instead, my opponent does play this e5 move, and okay. I just go for knight g5. Leaving my bishop hanging, because if black does take, we take on f7, the queen moves up, we take the rook, and this I felt was fine. Like queen g5 is still an idea coming in. Yeah, this was just fine for me. Not much else to really highlight there. If d5, then I would take on d5 here. The knight comes out. I go queen h5. After g6, move the knight back. Like, look at this. I can give up the queen because the knight f6 check. The king's forced over to f8 and right into mate here. So, yeah, just a wild position here. Automatically after knight g5. I mean, if castles, you run into queen h5. If h6, the knight's taking on f7, hitting the queen. So the rook has the take. The rook takes the knight. The bishop takes. The king has to come up to h7, because if king h8, well, we take on h6, and, well, bishop g4, queen here, knight here, and then this is just... Black's is getting completely run over. And so after king h7, we just drop the bishop back to e3. Because if black wants to take, we'll happily open up the f file, be able to bring this rook into the game a lot quicker. So, so what else? Yeah, if queen h5, h6, yeah, if black does something like this, well, we get mate in 3. We give double check. The king moves. The knight comes back. The king goes here, and then queen h8 mate is a typical mating pattern. So, I mean, black's position is already so difficult to try and find a move after knight g5. The other move was, yeah, you can't even play bishop e6 because you just take, they take, and then knight takes e6, hitting the queen, hitting this bishop, hitting this pawn, queen. I mean, just everything's coming in, and we don't even care that our bishop's here. Because if here, then we simply just come in with check. We're gonna pick up this rook. I mean, just everything is just already, from a practical standpoint, so bad for black. Okay, so my opponent plays rook f8, and I mean, if you're playing rook f8 already in this position with white's knights and bishops, and I mean, this is just not good. Not good for you. And so I wanted to play queen h5 here. This was the move that I had looked at, but I thought maybe after g6, if I take the pawn, takes the bishop, I just wasn't sure about this. Bishop takes, rook takes, queen takes, king d7. I don't know. It felt fine. Obviously, the king, I mean, just look at black's pieces. Everything's clumped together here. My rooks are coming in. I felt like this was okay, but it just felt a little more complicated, and I couldn't quite see this final position to know that, like, if I see this clearly in my head, maybe I go for this line, but I also thought black could just go knight g6, and I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here. Maybe I'm just going bishop e3. And I might still be better here, but it's, I don't know, it felt a little, it didn't feel as good. So instead, I found this move, queen b3, just adding another attacker to the f7 square. And yeah, so here my opponent played d5, which was the move I considered to be the most critical in the line, cutting off the bishop. But after pawn takes, well, I felt fine here too. Yeah, this was fine because I thought about if knight a5, I could go queen here. If bishop d7, um, honestly, I don't quite remember what. Oh, I was just gonna take the pawn here. Yeah, I was just gonna take the pawn. I felt like okay, I got my pawn back. My bishop's no longer hanging. Like I have to be fine here. If a6, then my point was to play. What was it? A6. Um, hmm. That's a good question. I forget what I was gonna play after a6 here. I had something planned, but I don't quite remember what it is. Probably just bringing a rook over to one of the files playing for d6 here. Um, yeah, it might have been what I was looking at, but even here, I thought I was fine. So let's see here. Yeah, queen b3, d5 takes. All right, so knight d4. So my opponent comes in with knight d4, and I didn't want to trade pieces, but unfortunately, I felt like this was the only plan here. And now here, I spent 34 minutes before making a move, which is way too long to be thinking about a move, by the way. But I felt like this was quite a critical moment for me to try and figure out how to continue putting pressure on black. And I don't think I came up with the best plan to do that, but because what I really wanted to work, I wanted this bishop b5 move to work because it blocks. I wanted to be able to play knight d6 checkmate, but everything was just too slow. If I go for this type of maneuver, then just a6, and unfortunately, that doesn't work. I thought about maybe even sacking my queen here and then playing this, but unfortunately, my opponent just has knight c6 at the end of this, and so I knew knight d4 wasn't going to work, or knight e4 first wasn't going to work, because obviously if here, then we just take the knight, and that's fine. So yeah, this just isn't fast enough. We might still be better, but now it's more complicated. So okay. So anyway, so after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4. That's why I spent like 34 minutes there. I really wanted to make, I wanted to just checkmate black, and I couldn't make it work. I wanted to bring a rook over to the open file, but I that was hard for me to calculate and make sure that worked, because otherwise I'm just completely giving up this piece on f4, and yeah, it looks good. The initiative and development looks great, but it was hard to fully calculate that and make sure that it would work. So instead, I decided, well, we'll give up the pawn to take the f pawn. And here I thought for a little bit too, because I wanted to play bishop takes, but after the king moves away, honestly, I just wasn't sure. Um, yeah, because the big problem too is I've got to worry about this open F file in those lines, which it happens anyway. But with my knight being something that's guarding, that can be kicked away, and then my queen being kicked away, like I didn't want to leave too much tactical stuff going on that I couldn't fully calculate these lines. But if pawn takes here, well, I was just going to take on f7 after rook takes, king takes, or yeah, queen takes, and then king moves, and then just play rook d1. And I mean, goodness, black is under way too much pressure here. Because I'm going to get this. We're getting a rook here. This is falling pretty soon. Knights, yeah, I mean, just this is too much for black, I think. After king c6, we take on d4. And if you move the knight away, well, we're getting black mated here pretty quickly. And so, yeah. So that's too much for black to handle if they take the bishop. So instead, my opponent took on d6, and here I already planned to sacrifice a piece on e5. Knight takes f7 first. Queen backed up. If the rook took, I was taking here. I figured king f8, and then I would just back this up. Because again, if they take, well, we just open up our rook. So obviously they're not going to take. I plan on them probably backing it up there. And then I was just going to bring in another rook. And we were just going to have a decent position here. And yeah. Okay. So that's the plan there. Because again, if queen f6, black has to be careful that they don't get themselves in a bind here. I mean, we're already threatening checkmate here. So yeah, I mean, just everything is just flowing for white here. So after queen c7, I took on e5. The reason I took on e5 is I saw that that the rooks were coming in here. But first and foremost, I played bishop b5 first, and I thought this was the more accurate way to continue this line. If the knight blocks, well, we simply pin the queen. So I knew black couldn't go that way. And if black blocks with the bishop, after takes, and then queen takes b7, well, this has got to be good too. If the king moves back, we take the rook. If the king steps behind the queen, we pin the queen. If the king steps up here, we simply check first. Again, if the king goes behind the queen, we come back here. Otherwise, the king steps up, we bring the other rook. Just to show that, king here, rook f to d1 check. Yeah, if king e6, rook e1. If king comes over here, well, you get mated very quickly here with this. So honestly, after queen takes b7, I just stopped calculating because I just knew that this could be too much for black to handle. So when my opponent instead played this other move, king d8, I just completely overlooked this move, and I started to freak out. Because I freaked out because I thought the king would just march its way over to b8 with the queen on this diagonal. I don't have any checks. So, because I calculated rook a to d1, king c7, and I thought my opponent was going to hide on b8. And it was at this moment that I stopped my calculation instead of just pushing myself to calculate even just two more moves. If I just calculate two more moves, I would have seen that this was fine. Because after rook f e1, if the queen wants to stop my queen from giving checks, there's only two squares, and to guard the knight, there's only one square to do that. But the queen's doing two jobs. It's guarding this square and it's guarding the knight, and it can't do both. And I could take the knight, queen takes. After queen check, the king steps up and rook d6 comes in. And black has to take the rook. If black takes the bishop, our queen comes back over, gives check. There's only two moves. If king a5, rook d5 check, and it's mate. Otherwise, black can give up pieces here, but they still get mated. So, and if king c5, well, you get mated this way too. After rook d5, and you get walked over into mate on the same square. So black would have to take the rook, and then this would be winning as well. Black can't move the bishop. This is just terrible. We're probably going to b4, queen check here. I mean, this is just, yeah, just too much. The queen is too much against the bishop and the rook, plus we're also up a pawn. So okay. So all I had to do was calculate just a little bit further. So instead, the king marching over freaked me out. So I played rook a to c1, thinking I would still have time for checks. But instead, my opponent plays knight c6, another move that I just really just didn't even consider. And now, the same problem. If I give a check, the king again gets over to the corner. So I knew this can't be good. And so I just took, thinking, well, I at least get 2 pawns for the piece. Plus, I felt like my pieces were, my rooks, I would be able to win the piece back. And so that was kind of my goal at this point, was to just win the piece back. And hopefully not have screwed up this game. Because honestly, I was feeling nervous that I just let this game slip away. And once again, I was going to lose in a critical game. And all for nothing, just because I missed king d8. Which honestly, king d8 wasn't even a move to really help my opponent. So okay. So my opponent plays bishop d7, obviously getting their piece out into the game. And now after king e8, well, here I felt like my opponent was just trying to walk away, but my queen guards that f7 square, so I wasn't too nervous here. And after I found this queen b4 move with the threat of rook e1, I felt like I was better here, because I saw rook f4. I did calculate this, and I was going to play queen back here, and I've got too much on the bishop here. And now here I thought for a while too, because obviously I've got to be nervous about this move at some point. Yeah, I still can't take the bishop just yet. And so I had to come up with an idea. And if I check first, I figured the king would just run away. And that couldn't be good. So I figured, well, I'll attack the queen first. Force the queen back. And then maybe I can get something going. And after my opponent put queen f7 to keep an eye over the bishop, well, now I knew I might have something. I saw this plan of rook e5 check, king moves over, queen checks, and now I can play rook e7. And I'm going to get my piece back. And I was happy with this. And after rook f6, I calculated that move. I can take the bishop anyway. Because if my opponent plays, takes the queen, I saw that I had a winning endgame after all of this. And my king just marches out. and I've got the 2-on-1, the 3-on-2. I'm winning. 2 pawns up and a king and pawn endgame. That is an easy win there. So, but my opponent played rook e8, and honestly, I didn't see this move either. And at this point, all I was thinking about was how to get into a king and pawn endgame. And so I pinned the queen first. After taking, you got to take back with that rook. If you don't, well, you get back rank checkmated. So you got to take back with the correct rook. And after rook comes down, I give back another pawn. I give a check, king f7. I thought my opponent would play something like king e6 or king f6. Either way, I was planning on taking that pawn and then thinking I might win this endgame. But this is probably just a draw here. But I thought I could squeeze out a victory there, but that was definitely going to be difficult. But instead, my opponent played rook e7, going into a losing king and pawn endgame, and I honestly just shook my head because I didn't think this was a move I would ever see on the chessboard from here. I did not think my opponent would play this move. And so from here, I calculated my king coming to e3, and I stopped calculating because that's completely winning. And so I get there, my opponent takes the opposition right across from my king, but then I just played b4. And now here I had to be careful. There's only one move that wins. Everything else draws, basically. And so I keep the opposition after a6. Well, we simply force black to make a move away. And now we push with b5. If the king went back to c6, well, that I was going to be fine with as well. We could just go king c4, king d5, and we're winning this as well. So, but after the king went this way, I went ahead and pushed the pawns. I saw this idea of king c4, but I thought after king f5, I push, takes, and we get this. And I felt like this was winning too, but I didn't want to give my opponents any chances to create problems for me. So I just went ahead and pushed my extra pawn, rounded up my opponent's pawns over here, and then my opponent resigns here. Because my opponent doesn't have any type of stalemate ideas here, king h8, I just push the pawn, and we get a queen. If my opponent after g5 plays king h7, I have g6, king h8. Now normally, without this pawn, this would be a draw. But with this pawn, I can just play h5, force black to move away, and then I get a queen. And if king f8, well, we end up with a similar line here, and we get a queen. So after g5, my opponent resigned, and I am now the sole leader in the tournament with 1 round to go. So quite an amazing game. I did let it go almost after king d8, but this piece sacrifice with bishop takes e5, which probably, and seeing this bishop b5 check, yeah, I wish I had played it more accurately. I wish I had stopped and thought just a little bit longer here to find these developing moves, rook a to d1 and rook f to e1. I mean, these are just the moves that they just make sense. They just make sense to play. And why I didn't play them, I really don't know. The king going to b8, for some reason, just I don't have words. I don't have words for it. It was a mental breakdown in the game, and yeah, there's just no words for that. But luckily we still pulled it off, and and got the win. Honestly, I thought White's position was lost after Rook A C1, Knight C6 and stuff. But it turns out it was just an even position at that point, where Black, even though they were up a piece, they didn't hold the advantage. So, and I thought my position was completely in Black's favor, and then maybe I worked my way back up, but no, I just went from being way up to being equal. So, I hope you enjoyed this game, and round 7 will be done tomorrow. To be honest, it's not that exciting, but there are some key just mental decisions in how the game proceeded that you might find interesting in a match strategy, but they're in a tournament strategy for the final round. But other than that, this is David signing off. I'll see you in the next video.